Welcome, and thank you for joining our Polito Walker webinar, Pursue the Possible, Defining Mount Veeder. We've flown through the vineyards at Mount Veeder Estate, and now we're in our home in Yountville. We're in the sunroom, actually, affectionately known as the sipping room, where family and friends come together and have that first sip of Polito Walker and have engaging conversation before we go to dinner, and sometimes end up back in here after as well. I'm Donna Walker, and with me today is my husband of 36 years and my business partner extraordinaire, Mark Polito, and our award-winning and winemaker and friend.
Dear friend.
Who has, under his watchful eye, really has led us to make many of the decisions that we're going to talk about today, Thomas Rivers Brown. Over the next hour, we're going to take you through the journey of our patient pursuit of the possible. When we first discovered and acquired this incredible property at the southern end of Mount Veeder, to taking the next 5 years really to understand the geography and what this unique terroir provided for us, to planting our first growth estate vineyard, and then the cap of it all is blending this inaugural vintage of Mount Veeder Estate Cabernet. We'd like to thank all of you who have sent in questions. We've tried to interweave them in our conversation today. And I hope you have a glass of your favorite Polito Walker wine to sit back and enjoy the story and journey. Mark, if 15 years ago, we purchased this property, and it has been an incredible look back for us as we've been planning this webinar. Why don't you kick us off today and talk about where we started?
Well, it actually started nearly 40 years ago when we first started dating, and then through marriage, our annual trips in the 80s to the Napa Valley, exploring the vineyards, the valley floor, the mountains, what went on in a winery, and the attraction was to these remarkable single vineyard wines. And I remember some of them today, just like we first tasted 35 years ago. And then in the 90s, our home in St. Helena, and then it really started our intense focus on creating something special. And we searched all over and ended up finding and landing a property in Mount Veeder. And what attracted us to it was this first growth, this idea that we could start from scratch, learn about the land. Nothing had ever been there. It was an old cattle ranch, so grassland. And then we could find out what was possible by doing that. And that's what brought us to Mount Veeder. We'd had Mount Veeder wines before. We loved the region. We knew it was tough and we knew it was challenging, but we were up for that. And that started our discovery of the land that we now had and needed and wanted to learn about.
So that's the beginning of the story. That next 5 years, we really spent understanding what we had acquired. And this number of studies we did, and I can't believe that when you came home, so we're doing 100 soil pits that are going to be dug across this property.
But
you dug through every one.
Yeah. Well, we're both pharmacists, and so we have a wiring of science, and we have this scientific method that you frame a hypothesis, so what's possible, where do you want to end up if the experiment turns out to be correct. But then you gather data and you go through a testing. And so we took that scientific method, and up at Mount Veeder, what we initially did is put in weather stations. We went through a regulatory control process. Here in Napa, you just don't have land and plant grapes. You go through a very lengthy, and because it was hillsides and we were very cautious never to cut down a tree or interfere with the stream, we ended up getting approval to plant 25 acres. We discovered those 25 acres through two major methods. One was to put up weather stations, and it was interesting what we did. So you gather the growing season, you see what's possible, what the microclimates are, what an individual block would give you. But we wanted to do what they called a correlation study. So we looked at 3 other sites across the Napa Valley and said, how does this site this year compare to these other sites? And then with that correlation study, we said, now take those other sites, so 3 prominent, Stag's Leap, Upper Mount Veeder, Oakville, and compare it to the last 10 years, what would have happened based on what you just did and learned in that correlation study. Look back 10 years, can you grow Cabernet? And everybody told us we were crazy. It's too warm for Pinot, too cold for Cabernet. Numerous vineyard management companies said, we'd love to work for you, but I think you're wasting your time and your money. And then what we ended up finding out was that this site had a remarkable cooler days and warmer nights, and you can actually see the bay from it. And that would give optimum ripening time without heat spikes. And so the control would then go to the winemaker and not to just the climate alone. And so that gave the optimum opportunity to do something with a great growing season. And then to understand what was below the ground, we engaged government satellites and, we took, 3D pictures of what that land looked like, the contours, the slopes. That satellite photographs ended up creating, slopes and swales, and it let us map out what a vineyard would look like. And then from there, we embarked on soil pits. And you affectionately talk about them, but they're 6 feet long, 6 feet deep, 2 feet wide, and 99 of them I personally crawled through, but the team, the PhDs that did the science for the study and the soil pits, actually gave us insights into what was possible. And that kind of framed the baseline of the experiment. And then with that, the real heavy lift was when Thomas got that information and said, what could be created here?
Yeah, so Thomas, today we defined this webinar as defining Mount Veeder. And you've even said redefining Mount Veeder in some of our conversations. And we've talked about so many times what the vineyard gives us. That's what we're able to put quality fruit in the bottle. So tell us a little bit of how all this information that you got, 5 years of data that we've collected, how did that influence the decisions that you asked us to make?
Yeah, no, it was a lot of data. I don't think I'd studied that hard since I was in college. I think even in college I didn't study that hard. But I think it's 2 sets of data really. It's soil and it's climate, and you sort of look at them together, but also of course individually. And as we were talking about previously, the sort of soil data, I think, also mostly informs your rootstock decision, which could fall more probably on your vineyard manager. So I think that was Josh Clark at Clark Vineyard Management who really dug into the soil data.
Kelly Marr getting in the details.
Absolutely, a lot of great heads just sort of putting themselves together to figure out what exactly the rootstock should be. And then I think the climatic data, we knew we wanted to trend towards cab. We knew that from the start. The climatic data led us to believe this is kind of a set of clones that we knew we could ripen, clones of Cabernet. And then here's some fringy clones that we really like that in a warm year, yes, in a cold year, no. Well, it just so happened the 10 years that we were collecting this data and thinking about planting, things were changing quite quickly. So for all these people who thought you were crazy to plant cab in this section of Mount Veeder, it's turned out to be not really an issue getting stuff right. But what we wanted to do was pick some safer clones and then pick some, like I said, a little more challenging clones. And now in 2021, 2018, our first vintage, it was not an issue getting things right at all. Yeah. But the cool part was the soil also showed that there should be some chard on the property. Some clay belts, some areas with better water retention, and a climate that suggested it would be warm enough to ripen Chardonnay without it being too warm to get it overripe. So I think when we put all that together, we sort of set upon 4 different clones of Cab and then eventually 3 different clones of Chard, knowing that these were going to be our best foot forward and these was going to give us something to blend the 2 estate wines from.
Mm-hmm. And that study gave you a chance to take 25 approved acres out of 115, and then the best uniformity brought it down to 18 micro blocks, which became 15 acres that we ended up ultimately planting.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a knock for what we've all seen on Mount Veeder is there's so many different exposures and peaks and swales and valleys in a single block. And it's really hard to figure out how to plant that. People are out there with flagging tape and saying, pick these 8 vines and then these 8 vines and the north face and the top of the hill. And inevitably, you can't get even fruit. It's not evenly ripe fruit. And so what y'all did and what we all did, I think, eventually together was, to Mark's point, pick these micro blocks that were big enough to ferment by themselves, but also even enough to where we could grab everything from the block. And to y'all's credit too, in 18, there was even some end vines that looked a little vigorous, some bottom rows of some of these micro blocks that looked a little overly vigorous, and we left those out there. So the idea was these fermentable blocks that were incredibly consistent and our best foot forward there. But even on top of that, if there's a few things that stuck out as not being consistent amongst the block, we just left it out there.
Right. So in 2015, nearly 10 years after we purchased this property, we finally did our first planting. And Mark, I know you're going to get a kick out of this first picture of Kelly Marr and you actually planting. We really had to dig in the archives here. You're planting some of the first vineyards. I don't know if it's like when you were on the sorting line, if they kind of kicked you out quickly because you weren't as quick.
No, it was just so exciting after climbing through soil pits, analyzing weather data. You know, we were actually a year late. We were supposed to plant in 14, but in Napa there was, the emergence of red blotch, and we wanted to make sure every vine was clean and pure. This is a 40, 50-year crop, and so we went through protocols with Kelly, PCR, a word we all know commonly today, but back then actually ran virus testing on each vine to make sure it was clean. So that delayed us a year, and finally in 15, so the joy of holding something that came out of a nursery in a little plastic capsule that was then placed into the ground was just so exciting.
Well, then we eventually planted 22,000 vines of our first growth vineyard. In 2015, you see the photo of our lower blocks of our Old Vine Winty Chardonnay, actually. Looking at very young, just the vines had just gone in. And then just 2 weeks ago, we went back to that same vantage point. And you can see the vines have matured and grown, and that the lushness that we're looking into the Old Vine Winty as well. We ended up planting the 15 acres, as you mentioned, that we finally planted 75% to Cab with 4 clones, the 1530, 169, and 685. And then 25% to Chardonnay, which was our first venture out of the Cabernet varietal with the Montrachet, Old Vine Winty, and eventually the Robert Young clones. And, Thomas, we talk about clones, we kind of throw those around, and we've mentioned them already several times in the webinar. And we get a lot of requests from people that are participating days. What is the clonal difference, and why does that matter? And did you pick things specifically for this site?
We definitely targeted the site, as we mentioned earlier, based around climate mostly in the beginning. I think if we flash back to, say, 2010, when y'all started collecting some data, we probably would have even gone with some even more cold weather suited clones. But as things changed and we collected more data and the world sort of warmed up, we were able to push towards some stuff I would say that were sort of medium warmness clones. The one nod towards the one clone we thought for sure would always ripen is the 169. So that's an early ripener of Cab. 1530, 685, I would call them medium, with 15 being even a little medium plus. So that was our stretch clone. It turns out with the change in climate, it hasn't been a problem getting anything ripe. And I think the combination of them, I think they all have different characters, and instead of falling in love with your one clone and just planting one thing out there, I think you leave a lot of complexity on the table potentially, because the sum of the parts is always better than any individual part, even if it's your favorite individual part. And I think we saw that we've seen that every time we've blended, regardless of whether it's Melanson or the Mount Veeder estate. And then Chardonnay, there's a little bit of heritage of Chard on Mount Veeder. Like I remember first moving out to Napa and drinking mid-late 90s Patson Hall Carr Vineyard Chardonnays from Mount Veeder. So there's definitely history there, there's some pedigree there. And when we saw the soil and the climate data come back, I think that sort of suggested that we might have a white wine, which also is nice in tastings to kind of kick the tasting off so you don't sit someone down with a big glass of Cab right from the jump. And then I think there, Old Vine Wente is kind of the standard bearer. Very obvious to plant that. And then I think the other two, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think we kind of pursued those because they represented wines that we all enjoyed.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
So
absolutely.
instead of getting something that was an abundant producer or something that we knew was like fundamentally super clean and easy and conservative and maybe a little devoid of character, we went after two clones that represented wines that we really liked. And I think the results of that, especially since 18 when we've been blending Chards, is we just have a much more complex Chardonnay. It might not be the most abundant producer, especially the Wente, but what we get is really good.
Absolutely. That's the feedback we got. So, Mark, some other people have been asking about how did we decide when we were going to harvest and put the first fruit in the bottle?
Well, just the way that you plant a vineyard after you understand your soil and your weather, and your vineyard management team and Thomas guided us to the best in the industry. And with that, you prepare it, and then finally the nursery gets the order, and the clean rootstock is propagated in the nursery, and it's grafted with the clones that Thomas selected, and then that goes into the ground. And that was 2015 around July. And then what we wanted to do is watch it evolve and watch it grow, never first year, never second year. Just drop the fruit at the end of the season. The third year, some people sometimes bring it in the winery. Maybe it makes the cut. Mostly it's often bulked out. What we decided is to stretch it for the best prospects and start with the fourth leaf and see if that fourth leaf would make the cut. And if it didn't, we were prepared to bulk it out. But as it turned out magnificently, and is something that Thomas felt would qualify for an estate single vineyard designate.
So, Thomas, this talks about this young vineyard that we have, and a lot of people are interested about the future. And I know you always have that in mind as you're looking at where we are. But what do you see happening, or what's your expectations of this vineyard for the future?
Well, I mean, the best part about the future vine maturity we'll see will be consistency. When the vines are young, you really see the differences in the soil. If you have some challenging soils, maybe you have some more anemic vines, you have to be very careful about how you farm those and how you pick them. And I think over time, especially with a better root base, because some of the root stocks are slower developing too out there, you just get more consistency, which, as we all know, consistency generally equals quality in the wine business. And I think we were pleasantly shocked at how good some of these 18 lots were, but you also saw a very clear pecking order across the 4 clones when we sat down to blend. And there was a couple things we just didn't really dig. And I think, and then in 19, you see that third clone kind of show itself as worthy of making the blend. And I think you're seeing vine maturity just raise the overall quality of everything, including the 2 lots we really loved in 18. We really loved the 685 and the Clone 15 in 18. And I think as great as they were then, you're just going to see those continue to get better as the vineyard matures. And again, consistency for us equals quality. Because you're out there, y'all are looking at every vine, Josh and his crew are looking at every vine, but you still miss a couple things. And so when you can raise that consistency, even if there's fewer things to miss, it's kind of a weird way to talk about quality. But I think with vine maturity, we'll just get better and more even fruit that'll produce better wines.
And in 18, it was 1 pass on green thinning and like 2 passes on red, almost 85% veraison, and then even after, just to continue to make sure that what would even come in the winery was spectacular fruit. And then I think we only ended up bottling maybe 60% of what went through that 20 months of oak barrel aging.
Yeah, well, we had a lot of great stuff to choose from. I mean, as
Yeah.
great as the vintage was, it was also qualitatively, it was also abundant, which was great because then everything just proceeds at a slower pace. You can make smarter decisions. The picking window elongates. And I think if that's our first swipe at it and it was that good, I mean, the future just looks incredibly bright going forward.
Well, you're talking about quality, and I think Mark's got the nickname of Q Cubed for quality, quality, quality. That's part of our.
You all said that behind my back for like 3 years. You know?
It was a long time. Yeah, you would end the emails with quality, quality, quality.
Right.
In the winery, quality, quality, quality. So we're like, oh, here comes quality, quality, quality.
There you go. There you go.
It's not a bad nickname.
Yeah,
No,
Q3,
no,
I found out.
actually not.
Yeah.
But we talk about that, tenacious commitment to excellence, the quality, 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 and that's really kind of formed our whole philosophy for this brand. Not just with Mount Veeder, but from the very beginning. You want to talk about some of those components?
Well, the things that were important to us is to make decision making easy, not hard. And easy for us was quality, quality, quality. There wasn't this good, better, best trade-off. It was only the top. And so it made decision making, it met the teams that we all work with every day in the winery, the vineyard, any decision Donna and I are making, there's only one answer, and it's long-term and it's quality. And so with that, it was important to us to learn, and we made a bunch of mistakes. In the beginning, we had an '08 and an '09, and that was with different vineyards, different winemaker. Again, framing the experiment, going through the scientific method. We wanted to get feedback on those wines before we would go the next step in considering the bottling them. We went around Napa, and I remember, Thomas, when it was Nancy Duckhorn and you and I sitting at Outpost at the table with you saying, I've got these wines, tell me what you think. And you're like, well, they're interesting, but they're not great.
Right.
And for us, others had said that the winemakers within Napa that we showed them to as well, will add this, blend it with that. You can fix it next year. And you said, let's get great vineyards and let's just dial them in. And with that, we said, okay, can we work together? And you said, I want to see Mount Veeder. Right. And you came up, I'll never forget, and looked at the vineyard.
Chaz made lunch that day, and I talked Southmouth with you.
That's right.
That's exactly right.
And then I think Hazel was born the next day.
That's exactly
so
right.
you were like right on the...
It was April 5th, I think.
Yeah, right on the edge of, I disappear for a little while. And it's Thomas's second child, Oscar being the first.
But it was basically, would you be our winemaker and start this journey over with us? Because we never released the '08 and '09.
Well, Thomas said, we're going to start over, but we're going to do it for the long term. And that, again, was an easy decision. Most people wouldn't take 20 barrels and start over.
Right.
We did, and it was this maniacal focus, but always one answer: quality, quality, quality. And with that, we started learning about vineyards and custom crush. And then over time, it led us to all estate vineyards, and with Thomas and our third partner, Frank Dotzler, building Mending Wall. So we have the opportunity from vine to bottle to control every aspect of quality, quality, quality. And that's what that journey taught us. But the decision making was always simple and fast because there was only one answer.
Right.
And Mending Wall has been, great. And Mark always refers it to a winemaker's winery because you got to really lead everything we were going to do.
From scratch, you designed
to
it.
do that.
Yeah,
And we got the small micro fermenters,
well,
for us.
and also y'all coming on as partners. When Frank and I found this property and started thinking about building the winery, Frank came to me and said, what do you think? I was like, I can't do half, but I can do a third. So it naturally became, okay, so who's going to be the partner in this? And y'all were clearly the first choice. And thankfully you said yes when we propositioned you. Yeah. And it's been a great partnership since. I mean, we all bring different things to the table, creating the Mending Wall Winery and building it up to what it is now, and the roster of clients in there and the staff that we all love. And it's just been a great growth journey, and to grow Polito Walker along with it has been a lot of fun.
It's been exciting.
Well, and you've done so so many things from the quality standpoint there, because we actually got fermenting tanks that you were like, if we're going to do these small lots, we want to be able to have the equipment to take advantage of that.
Sorting
Absolutely.
and everything.
Yeah.
I mean, that journey within Mendingwall of what you drove in quality there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a luxurious winery. Like we always joke, we didn't put a bunch of marble in the bathroom, but we spent all the money making sure we can make the best possible wines.
Right.
And when we've needed to tweak things, we've tweaked it. I mean, it's cool. It's kind of a winery without a budget. Thank goodness. So if we need to pursue small fermenters, we go buy small fermenters. If we want optical sorting, we go buy optical sorting. There's never like, oh, well, how does this pencil? It's like, if it's for quality,
Right.
or quality. Let's just do it. Let's do it. There's never any question.
When you added the optical scanning, the sorting devices, we were so excited. We're like, oh, pharmaceuticals, we understand this.
Well, the wine business is funny. It's not the most technologically advanced industry. And so this has been a technology. People are like, oh, wow, something new. I'm like, well, it's about 50 years old. Other industries have had it for a long time. But it's made a huge difference for us qualitatively, proper use and better use of labor. Like the people we hire want to learn to make wine and want to make wine. They don't want to just clean stuff all day and stand at a sorting table for 15 hours. So it's just smarting the winery up while also improving the quality of the wines.
Yeah.
So this journey that we started together, our first vintage 2010, the three of us, and by 2018 we were estate growing and Mendingwall. And then in 2019, you guided us to Policy Vineyard. And that was exciting because you were involved day one with Carmen and Gail Policy and Jim Barber and planting it. And so it gave us that same underpinning of all the quality aspects as that first growth on Mount Veeder that we actually got to plant together and start from scratch. And so that journey of, if you will, exploring and learning and discovering to controlling and quality and having all estate growing with the Mendingwall, it's turned out to be spectacular for us, for everything that comes from that vine into that bottle that we have on the table and we'll be enjoying later together.
Yeah. Surely. Our story, the things we've talked about, the quality, our pharmaceutical backgrounds, actually is really told on the label of our bottle. We, Mark and I both being pharmacists, when we first started practicing, because both our dads were pharmacists too, so we both worked in their pharmacies, and you would get a prescription came in, and the label is actually the shape of an old prescription pad. Now, nobody sees that because it's all electronic now, but that's where the heritage came from. And then we have the top of the label shows the balance with the vintage on it, followed by our name. And Mark and I felt strongly about putting our personal name, Polito Walker, on the label to show our commitment and what it represented, our family, that we founded this, we operate it, and we're hands-on involved every day. Then it also shows Cabernet Sauvignon, or whatever the varietal is. And since we love and have a passion for single vineyard designates, it shows Cabernet Sauvignon here. And then the appellation. And then probably the cornerstone to our label is the ancient apothecary weight. And this is gold engraved on our label with the alchemy symbols for the seasons, winter, summer, spring, and fall. And really represents our family's weighing and measuring of decisions every day of every season, from decisions in the vineyard to the winery, to ensure that we are making those decisions for being exceptional. We have a tenacious commitment to excellence. And so that's really become the symbol that represents our family's determination to craft these single vineyard designate wines that are authentic to what you were talking about. The sum of the parts is greater. And then the label also has Thomas's name on it. So all three of us have made that personal commitment and endorsement of what goes in the bottle. The bottom strip is the clone, so that those that want to know a little bit more about the wine, the elevation,
Soil.
the soil composition as well. And then on the back, it says, pursue the possible, estate grown, which is what we've evolved, always pursuing that perfection of every element. And the estate grown that we've been able to achieve with now our three vineyards that with Policy, Mount Veeder Estate, and Melanson. And then at the bottom, there's a QR code that actually connects you to the tasting notes. So you can share those at your table if you want to see Thomas's excellent description of what you're about to consume, or that vineyard site. It's all there.
Well, I have to put my English degree to use.
It's like every label tells a story, and literally it does.
It does.
Yeah.
It's the summary of everything we've talked about.
It's the three of our statement about what we do in the vineyard and the winery.
Well, what I love is talking to touch on the front label that my signature's on there. I'll get the call, hey, will you sign some bottles? I'm like, it's already there. I mean, my handwriting is so poor, you can barely tell that's my name, but it's there, I promise.
It's authentic.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's authentic. So we've been talking a lot about the vineyard, and we've talked about the outside of the bottle. So let's talk about what's in the bottle now. Thomas, can you share a little bit about that 2018, that first vintage that we've now having this inaugural offering?
Well, I mean, we had the genius idea to start in 2018, which is always nice to kick off a new product and a new wine in a great vintage. And 18 turned out to be fantastic. I think it was a cooler season by Napa standards, which certainly doesn't mean cool as we would think of weather being cool, but a longer growing season, a bigger crop. So we had the ability to pick and choose exactly what we wanted from the vineyard, which we touched on earlier. Also, the vagaries of the vintage, you can kind of withstand them better when you have a bigger crop. It moves a little more slowly, and you don't feel quite as bad removing things that are compromised if there's a heat event or a little bit of mildew or something like that. So we were able to slowly refine. We had nothing super traumatic, unlike the previous year, happen towards the end of harvest, so we were able to leave it out as long as we needed to as well.
Okay, so we always get phone calls, or not always, but we have about Thomas is still letting the fruit hang. He's the only winemaker that has fruit hanging.
Yeah.
And we're always like, when Thomas decides.
I know it's there, I promise. So people have some doubts. And the nice part about you guys owning the vineyard is you weren't getting those calls.
No, not anymore.
No, you could call each other and ask. That's it. And so we were able to leave it out there until we wanted it. And bigger crops, like I said, they ripen more slowly, but without any traumatic events at the tail end of harvest. We're able to leave it, get full maturity, great crunchy brown seeds, good color extraction. Like we like to pluck a berry, roll it in our fingers, and see color actually extract from the skins. We picked based on flavor, so perfectly resolved flavor when we got there. The berries were pretty big, and so a lot of people were comparing it to the 12 vintage in the beginning. That was a charming vintage that I would say was medium weight, medium color. So when we first heard that and saw the berries, we thought, okay, we're gonna have to kind of work hard to get extraction here. But I think because of the hang time and the true ripeness, we really didn't. So like 2 or 3 days in fermenter, especially actively fermenting in fermenter, wines were jet black, super aromatic, structure was coming up early. So getting what we wanted out of the must was pretty easy. And again, sometimes you don't know that until you start. Right. So this being a slightly later site, we had the benefit of having harvested, probably 50 different lots for other clients and seeing exactly what the vintage character was like. Mm-hmm. So by the time we got to Mount Veeder Estate, we had a really good idea what the vintage was going to give us. We knew we didn't have to overwork the wines, over extract them potentially. Extraction, concentration, color just came so easily. Right. Yeah. It was a big vintage. We worked hard to get everything into mending wall, but the cool part was the vintage really stretched out. So the pick window was long and gave us ample opportunity to pick everything at the perfect time.
Yeah. So then move a few years. We've now had the wine and barrel for 20 months, and we have
Maybe back up a bit and talk about the barrel cooperages. I think that's a key part of, as you understood the site and decided which clones, after fermentation, what type of barrels, did you pick, and how did you figure out the regimen?
So we really don't know in the beginning. So this was a new site, obviously, for us in 18. So you kind of do a little bit. We're not big barrel experimenters or Cooper experimenters, but we wanted to try a few different things just to see what we liked. So we probably started more with what we just generally liked than what we thought was going to be great for the site, because we didn't know. So the barrels for us work like the clones. You can fall in love with one, but sprinkling in 2 or 3 others always makes for a better expression. Yeah. So just like with the clones, the sum of all the parts, or some of the parts, is better than your favorite part. And the same thing has happened here. So we started with things like Darnajou and Taranceau and Biron, things that we knew were great. But again, not having experience with this site, or even having that much experience with Mount Veeder, we just didn't know. So this is going to be sort of the constant evolution. We talked about vineyard maturity, but I think also us, having more swipes at this site will refine those things too. I mean, it's a terrible joke, but if we had 12 vintages in a year, we'd get really good at it really quickly. we just have kind of one shot per year.
Right.
So the experimentation moves at a very glacial pace. So we've been refining the Coopers, but again, not falling in love with one and getting rid of everything else, but say taking the top 2, 3, or 4, knowing that the amalgam of all that is going to be better than that one barrel even that you think is the best barrel of the lot.
And Thomas, we've gotten a couple questions. We always are 100% French oak, but how do you have a sense for what's weighted towards new versus 1-year oak?
Again, in the beginning, it's a little bit of a blank canvas, so you're just kind of starting with I would say a high quality percentage, and then trying to figure out over time whether that works or not. So I would think we probably started around 80%. Mm-hmm. But the way the wine works too is if you barrel down, let's say it's 10 barrels in a lot, 8 of them are new, 2 are used. You lose wine when you rack post ML. You have evaporation, so your volume shrink. So you might start at 80%, but you might bottle at 90% new, because you lose a barrel along the way. Right. And you're tasting and trying to see, okay, is the oak dominating the wine, or is it complementary? How is it integrating? And that's not just a percentage question, that's also a cooperage question. Mm-hmm. So again, I think that refinement is what's going to just make these wines better and better over time, because we're continuing to figure that out as we get more harvests under our belt.
And each of the clones are fermented separately. So with your barrel regimen, you really get within each clone a number of barrel choices that gives you a palette to actually choose how to paint and create a masterpiece from.
Yeah, and also I think, I've never quite understood this, but you have a clone like 685 that we know to be pretty structured and black fruited and brooding and pretty big, and so you're like, oh, we can crush this with 100% new oak, it can stand up to it. It's a bit redundant. Like we almost take it the other way. If the natural expression of the clonal material or the block is to be big and brooding and massive, we might go a little under on the new oak because it just doesn't need it. Mm-hmm. And again, you're almost doubling down on the attributes that are there, which can then throw the wine out of balance a bit. So we'll try to balance it maybe with a slightly less new oak, whereas you have a block that might be driven more by acidity and more red fruited. So you want to cut through that acidity, and the acidity cuts through the barrel. So they end up being more complementary components. And so maybe these lighter blocks, which you wouldn't think of it this way, you use a little more new oak on those.
Yeah, that kind of leads us into when we do our blending sessions with you. I mean, we taste every clone, and we have it's the dishwasher's nightmare.
It's a dishwasher's nightmare with all the glasses.
Well, we don't wash the dishes.
I used to.
He started that way. But this was really a white canvas because, as you're saying, we had the clonal choices, the barrel choices, and there was no restriction. We wanted to make quality, so it was only the best was going to go into the bottle. But walk us through a tasting experience, particularly for this new wine.
Well, also just the evolutionary experience of the wines, because like you said, it's a total blank canvas. We've never harvested anything from the site before. We don't know it that well. We don't even know the AVA super well. And so I'll take you all the way back to fermenter. Like, you get a pretty good sense of how good something's going to be kind of early on, thank goodness. Even though you got 20 months to figure it out, when you put those grapes in the fermenter and they start fermenting, they just have a different aromatic to them if they're at that next level. And so what happens is you wander onto the crush pad and there's a bunch of pump overs going on at the same time where we're taking the juice out of the bottom of the tank, passing it through the skins, through the top for color, flavor, aroma, all that stuff. There's a couple tanks you're just like, whoa, what is that? Because you can smell it like across the crush pad, and you wander over and you're like, oh, that's the Pluto Walker Mount Veeder, clone 685. You're like, this is good. And you know right then it's good. Because if it's that good there, it's not going to fall apart and not get back to that level of goodness. So we started out with a few things being kind of the surprises of the vintage. Given the pedigree of the site and all the effort y'all put, we certainly expected good things from the vineyard. But the 685 and the 15 especially, even in fermenter, were really, really strong. And so we were sort of watching these things mature. We're tasting them when we're racking for post-ML, summer rackings, and then at bottling. So in between that second and last racking is our blending session. And so we're pulling these samples, and of course, we always taste them before clients come in, just so we're not surprised, good or bad. And so we're pulling them, and I'm looking at Tim, who runs production for us at Mendenhall. I'm like, damn, this is really good. This is really good. So this is going to be fun. This is not going to be one of those conversations, well, sorry, but this didn't quite make the cut and this didn't make the cut. It's like, what are we going to choose? And are Mark and Donna ready for this amount of wine from a first vintage
Our
off Mount Veeder?
collectors are.
Yeah. And in hindsight now, of course, in 21, we're all thankful for the quantity. And so when all of us sat down to blend, we're like, this is all kind of good, so where do we start? Because obviously there is a pecking order, especially with vines that age.
Yeah.
So I think we all tasted, and I think we kind of decided 685, 15, 30, and then maybe the 169 last. Yeah. And the way we've always blended together was we just cut the bottom out. So if a clone stands out as not being that interesting, we just DQ the whole thing. And then we have something that we'd say is really good, but not the best. So maybe we sort of tinker with 1 barrel in, 2 barrels in, 3 barrels in. And then for me, anyway, the 15 and the 685 were just so good. To me, they were no-brainers to make the cut. It would have been a shame to kind of cut any of that out. People love to tinker with 1% of that, 2% of that. We all might be able to taste the difference, but in the finished product, it becomes subjective, not objective. And so when we sat down and sort of DQ'd one clone and then sort of had 3 left and began tinkering with everything we had, we were in a really nice place, but I remember 1 or 2 final adjustments, knowing this was a big deal. This was the first impression.
Right.
And then I think all 3 of us, and I think Tim was at the tasting too,
Was, yeah.
we put that last blend together and we're like, that's it.
That's it.
That's
Yeah.
it. And you could sit there 5 more hours if you wanted to.
Right.
You'd be very angry with each other and not get anything additional accomplished, but you could sit there forever and tweak that thing. But that last glass, I remember all of us just saying,
We're just, that's
the
it.
blend.
Yeah, and I'll never forget that. And at the same time, about 35% of what went into the winery through the barrels, the 20 months, didn't make the cut, and that was declassified.
Right. And it's always the right decision, especially with that first impression.
Yeah.
If we get super famous and we have a huge waiting list, we'll just put it all in. But
we'll always fight for that.
yeah, but for now we're
Q.
very cautious, and I think we made all the right decisions in 18, and in the 19 we just bottled.
Yeah.
I think again about 30% was declassified, and I think they was all really great decisions.
Well, the beauty of the way that you selected the clones, the barrel regimen, the small lot fermenters that this goes through, it gives you the ultimate choice at the end to say, and we always agree, what's the best of the best.
Right.
Right. I think that was one of the questions that came up at is, how do you tell when it's a really great vintage? I mean, you've talked about 18 several times. You
Right.
know.
Again, I think thankfully we figured out pretty early. I'm not, for instance, a great early blender. Like we always wait until we get close to bottling to blend, until Kelly needs to know exactly what the bottling
Yeah, exactly. How many
are.
bottles? What?
But then I think even in fermenter, like I mentioned with a couple of the clones, we just knew. I mean, again, you walk out on the crush pad and you're like, what is in tank 20? And you go over there and it's just aromatics just pouring out of the pump over bin. And it's already nice saturated black. And you know, I mean, I think have 26 harvests under my belt, something like that.
Wow.
I know, it's hard for me to say out loud. But
You're not that old.
well, I'm getting older every day, but you just know, and I think it's experience for sure. And like I said, if it's that good, then it's not going to just go away and become substantially less good. If it's that good in the fermenter, you just have it figured out.
So, in talking about and translating it now to Mount Veeder, how do you describe this first vintage? I mean, I know we talked about when we did that final tasting, our 2 mountain fruits, that we were overwhelmingly surprised it was this good right out of the gate. And it was,
Yeah, I mean, we blended it the same time we blended Melanson, and I think we were splitting hairs trying to pick a favorite between the two final
Right,
blends, which
yeah.
we know Melanson to be of super high quality,
Right.
and so that was a great compliment. I just think, you mentioned defining the AVA, but then you also said, well, maybe it's redefining. I kind of think that's what we're going to do with this site, because I think we all went into this thinking there's a lot of Mount Veeder wines that are super tannic, maybe more red fruited. Age-worthy maybe is a polite way to say out of balance when they're young. This wine is none of that. I mean, it's not red fruited, it's black fruited. It's not overly tannic. There's an abundance of tannin in there, but tannin is very ripe. So it gives the impression of structure, but it's still incredibly seamless. And so we had these ideas in our mind of what Mount Veeder is going to be, and then the wine is kind of nothing like that. It's just a product of that place and all the effort that y'all put into it, and hopefully eventually what more and more Mount Veeder wines taste like down the road.
And it's turned out to
Let's
be
have a glass.
Very
been
approachable
waiting.
young Thomas. Maybe talk a little bit about
Cheers.
that. Is
Yeah.
the approachable young and at the same time age-worthy?
Yeah, I mean, I think all the great, y'all love collecting wines, drinking wines, and I do the same. I think all the great wines out there are, one of the hallmarks of the great wines is they're drinkable young, they're drinkable middle-aged, and they age gracefully as well. And I think this wine certainly has it. Like I mentioned the tannins, there's plenty of tannin here for this wine to go for a really long time, but it's not intrusive. You don't taste it and think, I popped this way too early or should have been in a decanter for 12 hours. You taste it, you're like, this is great young cab. I can get a little bit of the grip on the finish, and I'm excited to be drinking it now. I'm excited to have that 3-pack, and I'll open the next one in a few years, and that third one in a decade. And I think that accessibility along the line is definitely a hallmark of all the great wines of the world.
Well, cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers to everybody.
Boy, the aromatics you were just jump out of the glass.
Again, probably completely unrelated to all the aromatics we associated with the AVA when we first started down this path. So,
Wow.
well, it's nice to be drinking too.
It's enjoyable. You know, we bottled this in June of 2020.
Right.
You know, in the fall, you get requests, and thought that the cut was good enough from the inaugural debut to show it some of the prominent reviewers. You know, we were so encouraged with the initial feedback we got just 90 days after bottling. And to taste these wines now a full year plus after bottling, they've just continued to become even more spectacular to me.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's a great structure, you know, and balance in the wine.
Like you
I
said,
mean, there's
the
some elegance to that.
structure is there, but it's not intrusive. So
Right.
when we were talking about how we pick a vineyard like this, we pick it based on tannin maturity. And the seeds inform a lot of that because we want the structure to be there. We want you to sense the bigness and youthfulness of the wine. But we don't want the tannins to stick out because, again, if it's out of balance now, maybe age corrects that, but maybe not. So for us, especially with a site like Mount Veeder, tannin maturity is sort of everything.
Yeah.
And I think the ability to have those blocks with uniformity of ripening gives you the best chance for that tannin maturity. So you're not blending, you know, a green vine with an over-ripened vine.
Absolutely.
You know,
And again,
asking the vineyard team to sort it out before they pick it. You know,
yeah,
which
some of
is
the
tough.
vines we left behind, I think that made a big difference. We talked about just a second ago bulking barrels out, but also we, in a sense, bulked some grapes out.
Yeah.
By leaving some end vines and some lower down rows that were maybe a little more vigorous and probably more green because of it.
Yeah.
Less tannin maturity. We just left them out there.
Well, that's just that discipline is only the best comes out of the vineyard and only the best from the barrel ends up in the final bottling. And
Yeah.
And it's a continual education. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's one of the things we always talk about. The more we know, the more we discover we don't know. And we're always open to learning. And, you know, we were actually walking the vineyard and we talked about the inrows and what else can we do to improve things. So we're continually talking to our vineyard management company, talking to you. I mean, how many times we walk through the vineyard saying, okay, what's our plan for this year? We've got kites flying at Mount Veeder this year. We're experimenting with the bird control.
Right.
And one of the guys that works in our vineyard came today. He said, "It's working. When the wind's blowing, it's working."
Yeah, when the wind's blowing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and
it's
you just keep focusing on continuous improvement
Right.
and also willingness to call it when it's not there, it's not there. And
Right.
when it is, it's spectacular. And if we're not going to pick it, like the first and last vine, if we're not going to bottle it, 35% of your production, so be it, because what has the three of our names on the front label has to be spectacular.
Well, it's the commitment we're making to everybody that's drinking our wines too.
Well, and we knew this was good, and to talk a little more about the critical reviews, we personally knew it was good. We were probably a little biased, so it's nice to get a third party
Right.
who also says nice things. And I really like the Jeb Dunnett comment where he says we'll potentially merit a 3-digit score in the very near future.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
bodes
This is
really
great.
well for the ageability, I think, of the
Exactly.
wine too.
Exactly. So one of the things we recommend for those opening bottle is to decant it for about an hour at this young age, and then enjoy it over dinner as you see it developing in the glass too. But that decant for an hour is kind of helpful to begin with.
Builds the anticipation too.
Yeah.
Hard to keep your hands off of it,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that part is really fun.
But that's
as well.
what we hear when you get your 3-pack too. Because it comes packaged, thanks to our son Chaz, with a little screwdriver and a note that says, "It's traveled, let it rest for 21 days if you're very anxious to open a bottle." And I had somebody call me the other day and said, "I really have to let it rest for 21 days?"
Well, I think what you do is you pop screwdrivers in there that don't work. You're sort of guaranteed to let it settle. We will send you the proper screwdriver in 21 days.
Yeah, there you go. And you kind of mentioned, so the first bottle, after their 21 days, go ahead and try it. Then wait a few years.
Yeah, it all depends on how you want to drink it. I mean, I think that becomes sort of personal preference a lot of times too. Like some people like the power that we're experiencing in this wine right now. They like that youthfulness and the sort of sweet fruit character and a little bit of grip. And then some people want to see that sort of mellow, and then some people really like the tertiary character. But the thing we do, especially with bottling, is we try to bottle wines a little earlier where the fruit is fresh.
Right.
And what that does is the bottle aging is slower than the barrel aging. It allows the customer to decide exactly what characters they like in the wine when they drink it. So if they want to drink it and have it taste almost like a barrel sample, they can pop it in 21 days. But then the aging curve on this wine is, 30 to 40 years probably.
Yeah, right.
Thomas, it's such a rounded tannin for such a young wine, particularly from Mount Veeder, which is known for structured or hardened tannins, and then yet the finish is so long and smooth. So I mean, how does it get there?
Again, it's the quality of the tannin. Like it would mean more to y'all than me as scientists versus English majors. But if you looked at the empirical number, like the tannin count in this wine, it's going to be substantial, and it's very Mount Veeder appropriate. Mm-hmm. But again, the ripeness of the tannin is what helps it all knit together and become seamless. Like, because you talk about those Mount Veeder wines that are overly tannic. I don't know that means they have an abundance of tannin. To me, that means they have underripe tannin, and that's why it really sticks out. So for us, that level of tannin ripeness is very important. And we talk about that at a lot of hillside sites, like when we talk about Pritchard Hill
Right.
and Melanson, same thing. When we talk about Frank's wines at Outpost with Howell Mountain,
Yeah.
the quality of the tannin is what unlocks all the quality in the mountain sites.
And what's great about this site, and I think what informed us and got us excited through the journey of the weather and the climate, but the weather told us for sure that we would have these cooler days and warmer nights, which gave you long ripening and hang time.
Right.
Sometimes into late October. I think these wines were almost at the end of the month. I mean.
Yeah, and I mean, as soon as you hit the site, you turn around and you see the bay.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's going to be cool there. Again, I think we thought we were going to be battling. We were going to pick in Halloween every year.
Yeah.
It's hard to pull for climate change, but there's been some upside to it warming up a bit for this site, for instance. I think we know for the most part. I don't want to jinx anything. We can reliably get this site right.
It's turned out great.
Yeah.
So, guys, we're doing this a little bit backwards, but we have our Chardonnay. You know, since today was really about the release
Right.
of the Cabernet, we focused on that. But the Chardonnays, you mentioned, Thomas, was really some of our personal style preferences with the Montrachet, you know,
Right.
and the Robert Young clones. So,
We've all been great fans of white Burgundy, and
Right.
and then your Rivers Marie wines is what said you can do that in California.
Right.
yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think you can pick something that's, you know, a great producer, but it's not going to necessarily give you a bunch of character. You can do all Wente and make one barrel a year, or you can sort of compromise across a couple different clones and again realize that you're going to create greater complexity by the blending of those three clones. And I like how we came to those three clones. Again, Wente being the standard bearer made
Right.
sense. Something like Montrachet is sort of littered all over Sonoma Coast. A lot of Marco Bear's amazing shards, for instance, are Montrachet clone or have a lot of Montrachet clone in them. And then Robert Young is the clone at Terriot, which is our best vineyard for Rivers Marie.
Right.
So to come at it that way, I thought was really fun too. It feels more personal that way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, well, we've talked about this isn't your typical Napa, you know, Chardonnay. You know,
Well,
it's-
we have collectors say, I love your cabs, but you know, I really don't buy Napa Chards. I buy Burgundy Chardonnays, and it's like, well, try this.
Yeah, I don't blame them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Try this.
And I think that was the goal here with the cooperage selection, the lack of lees stirring, the slightly earlier picking. I think the focus here was always on acidity, and then trying to push the fruit spectrum more to citrus as opposed to tropical for
Right.
that like
Right.
laser beam acidity cut that we all love about white Burgundy. That's what we were looking for in this wine.
Yeah, and Thomas, I have to say, our first Chardonnay blending was just an amazing experience. We usually go in the founder's room, and there's glasses all over, and Mark and I are waiting there going, okay, Thomas is never late. He's always got everything set up. And you come in, it's like, guys, where have you been? You know, and we go in, you've got all the barrels are racked, and we taste through every barrel. And you've got your chalk and you're doing a check or a neutral or minus. And we had 12 barrels that first year, and we tasted probably in August. And then we came back in November and tasted again. And then we did the blending, and it's multiple iterations. And we were like, okay, we're going to start with 3 of our Old Vine Wente out of 4, and then we're going to match it with the Montrachet on the same ratio. And we tasted that, and it was amazing because some of the barrels were like, okay, this is almost finished, you know, wine.
Right.
You know, they were so incredible. And we had the 6, and you're like, you know, quality, quality, quality. I think we can do it. I think we can do it one better. And we dropped 1 barrel of.
Well, we went from 12 to 5 barrels that made the cut.
Right. So finally, and I think this emphasizes that our commitment is to that exceptionalist. I mean, we really want that, and so every barrel's got to be additive. And
well, yeah, it's addition through subtraction, which people, those are the kind of things that people say that really irritate most of the population. But I mean, I think here it's true. And the cool part is, and why we did the individual barrel tasting is, with white wines, you press the grapes, and we go to barrel that day immediately.
Right.
They ferment in barrel. You have to leave quite a bit of headspace because they expand, but then you top those barrels up with another barrel of the same clone and vintage, of course. And then those wines rest in those individual barrels their entire lives. So it's like each barrel is its own wine.
right.
And so that's why we address it barrel by barrel, as opposed to pulling a composite of a clone like we do with Cab and saying, okay, here's the Robert Young / 685 if it's Cab. We taste every barrel because each barrel, all those 12 barrels are like 12 individual wines. And then we kind of give them a rating. There's a lot of whispering. There's a mild debating. And then as we got into the clones, you started to realize the Wente is sort of the cream of the crop in 18. So there was the idea that should be the lead clone. There was a couple barrels of Wente or 1 barrel of Wente we didn't really dig.
Yeah.
So
And we were surprised because it was like the favorite cooperage, and you know,
and
we
it
were
just
like, wow.
it just didn't work.
make it.
Right.
And I think we found with the acidity in this site too, and the way we picked it, the new barrels we favored over the old.
Right.
And that's not really our personal preferences, but those new barrels, especially the new Louis Latour barrels, just matched better with the fruit profile and just made better wines.
No,
It was
no,
just
an
so
incredible
fun,
experience.
yeah,
It was
yeah.
really fun. Yeah.
As we make more Chardonnay, there's going to be longer tastings. So
That's all right.
That's all right.
So for all those on the webinar, we held back some of our Chardonnay, and so on their offer, there is a limited supply of the Chardonnay available. So you'll see that when you get your allocation.
I haven't gotten mine yet. So does that mean there's any left, or is that it? Absolutely. Okay. All right.
We'll find it for you, Thomas.
It's marked in the cellar.
Yeah. Perfect. All right.
So we're winding down toward our magic hour. So we've got kind of a lightning round of a few kind of miscellaneous types of questions that we really wanted to address. One person asked, can we do scheduled tastings? And we do have tastings, a Polito Walker experience it at Mending Wall, so it's a specially curated experience there.
In the founder's room, yeah.
Yeah, and so just email us, Mark and Don at PolitoWalker.com, and we can arrange that for you. And if you're not coming to Napa, but you'd like to bring Napa to you, during the COVID pandemic, our team has gotten to be experts in doing wine tastings at your home. And Mark and I join, and we have kits where we can talk about the wine and taste it right alongside you. So
Bring it to your kitchen or dining
It's super
table.
fun. You can do it in your pajamas.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
Bring your friends over,
Exactly.
whatever your
And you
choice.
just pass
Yeah.
out in your home. It's great.
You don't have to drive.
Right.
So come to Napa or bring us to you. And then obviously, we lost our Mount Veeder home in 2017. And so there's a lot of questions about the fire. People are asking, what did we decide to do about rebuilding the house and property there?
Yeah, I mean, 17, that fire, we were 5 minutes away from 3 funerals. Donna and 2 of her close friends were on property and left in their bathrobes. And, to be sitting here today, to be sharing this wine, to be in Yountville at the beautiful home that Carmen and Gail Policy built, we're lucky. So the first thing we did is focus on what could we do for the community after we were safe. The rest is stuff. It's an insurance hassle. And the vineyard was mostly undisturbed. There were some blocks that had to be replanted, so we ripped them out.
But really not because of the fire, not burning, it was more the heat intensity.
It was the heat
so
intensity.
classy.
Vineyards are good fire blocks, but the heat intensity to the forest or the home ended up
And it was also our quality.
taking them out.
We wanted to make sure we
Well,
had
we didn't want to try to see if a vine survived
Right.
in 10 vines, would 3 be good, which year? We just said no, these aren't going to make it, and we took them out and we replanted. But that said, about 10% an inconvenience. None of it's in the bottling yet because we're not there to that 4th leaf. But the home site is beautiful. The vineyard is spectacular and exists, and that's what we're all enjoying in 18, 19, and beyond. And that led us. Thomas steered us and told us about this magnificent place that we're sitting in today. But it allowed us to continue our journey, and by being the next stewards of what Carmen and Gail Policy built here in Yountville, and the vineyard that Thomas and Jim Barber from day one planted for them, it gives us not only a beautiful place to enjoy living, but also the next vineyard designate, and it will be the 2019 Polito Walker Policy Estate Vineyard. And I think it's very complementary to what Carmen and Gail are doing and continuing to do with their Casa Piana.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then some people asked about the olive orchard. We have 105 trees in Mount Veeder, and makes exceptional olive oil. We did not lose a single tree. There was a couple we were worried about. We lost 2 vintages. The 17 we had smoke taint because the harvest of olives is normally November to December, so it was right in the thrust of it. And then we cut back the trees dramatically the following year, we were a little worried about if they would ever grow again, and there were several that were suspect, but they all came back, and so we had a wonderful harvest for 19, and continue to have the olive orchard.
Yeah, it's extra virgin, organic, and
Nature
a
really,
delight, yeah.
you get a real appreciation for nature. The pomegranates are growing, the fig trees growing, things that were exposed to the fire, you couldn't tell now.
And the vineyard, for the most part, untouched and
Right.
thriving, and
Yeah.
the 18 is
Absolutely.
evidence of
Yeah.
just a short year later what was possible up there. So.
But unfortunately, 2020 happened, and we experienced fires again, and they, not losing a house this time, but we had dramatic impact on
For
us.
the whole Napa Valley, the first L&U fire complex, while far away from us, you could see the impact on the eastern hills there, didn't get near our home. It wasn't the same situation in 17, but then the glass fire, the glass fire was at the parking lot of Mendingwall, and Thomas and the production team, literally in the middle of the night with hoses is protecting that winery, or that would have been lost. And so we as a family are very lucky that everybody's safe, that again, being supportive and helpful to the community, because there were many people that experienced a tremendous amount of devastation. But the net effect is that Polito Walker, all three of our vineyard sites, we did not pick Melanson. We just left it hanging. We knew it wouldn't make the cut. We wouldn't try. And then Policy and Mount Veeder, we were hopeful, very far away from the fires, but the air quality, so we brought that in the vineyard. It didn't make the cut, so Polito Walker will have no Cabernet from the 2020 vintage. We're still hopeful, Chardonnay in those individual barrels, and because it's not on skins, and it was well before the fire impact, in the second fire in the winery before that. We're hopeful, but we'll see. We're so disciplined about what comes out of the vineyard, what comes out of the barrel, what goes into the bottle. We think we'll have a 2020 Chardonnay, but 18 is for Cabernet, our big vintage. It's available now. 19, the production is down, and then there'll be no 2020. Right. So, that's kind of the lineup going forward. And 2021, the original set, looks promising, but lighter. So it's going to be a smaller vintage than I think 19. And we're hoping that we have Thomas always tells us, this year was drama or no drama, and so far we have no drama.
Knock on wood
in the vineyards, and we hope that continues all the way through to harvest. But the lineup is the 18 while it lasts, the 19 a year from now, less than we have today, and no 2020 Cabernet from Polito Walker. Right. As well as many others in the valley as well.
Yeah.
I think, Thomas, you saw firsthand across the barrel with what's happened to many of the projects.
Yeah, there's some folks that are still giving it a crack, and I'm hoping it works out for them, but it was almost like the harvest that didn't happen. You get so amped up for harvest and you're so excited by it. It's a lot of work, but you feel compelled to work that hard, and you feel good, and you feel really good after. It's almost like we got robbed of a harvest. So we're hoping 2021 is different.
Yeah. Well, from that news, then people ask, what's the future hold? So you've already are kind of tickled what's next?
We're pretty basic, and it's do something extraordinary, had the discipline and the willingness to stick with that Q3. And, so far, so good. So with Melanson, with Mount Veeder, the excitement about Policy, we'll have one clone of particular vines that go in that final bottling.
So 3 single vineyard designate Cabernet Sauvignon.
All made at Mendingwall under the control of Thomas and the team that's exceptional there. So vine to bottle, that Q3. If I was dreaming, and we always think out aloud. So, I think probably something between a single vineyard estate Chardonnay and a single vineyard R3 Cabernets might be a spectacular single vineyard Pinot, but we'll see where that takes us. And so, I think that'd be a perfect addition to a lineup, and time will tell.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you all for joining us for this webinar. Pursue the possible, redefining.
And Donna, thank you so much for the organization of this as well, and Thomas for giving us your time and being here together.
Yeah. So, thank you. We're going to change the title in retrospect to Pursue the Possible, Redefining Mount Veeder. And Thomas, let me echo Mark's. Thank you so much for being here. I know everybody was delighted to get to hear your perspective and your insights into our journey.
No, this is all of a sudden fun for me.
I
Thomas, enjoy these things.
We are so grateful for what you've done as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a journey for all three of us. I mean, from the very beginning, and often people can't say that, but this team's been together and we've taken every step, along the way. So that's spectacular.
And so appreciative. Thanks.
And thanks for the Polito Walker team and the production team who've actually done the technical part and made this all work.
And everybody for taking a day out of a Wednesday, late afternoon, early evening, and joining us.
Yeah, so we are very appreciative. There's a lot of people on the webinar today that we've known and were in our kitchens when we were looking at labels, so they've been along the whole journey with us. There's people who've collected from 2010, our very first vintage, and filled their cellars with Polito Walker, have a lot of extra screwdrivers. And then there's people that are new to Polito Walker, and we welcome you to the family. And we're also fortunate, we don't distribute a lot, but we have some very special partners, and many of our partners joined today to hear this. And with everything that we've experienced on this journey, and some of the ups and downs with the 2017 fires and the 2020, is we really appreciate this community. It's a remarkable experience. Mark and I are so happy and appreciative that we get to be here every day. And the Napa Valley has offered great family experiences for us, from bottling our olive oil and labeling that personally, Chaz and his friends, to being able to live our dream. And so thank you for all being on this journey to pursue the possible.